Okay, so here we are, end of the trilogy that begun the Donkey Kong launch into a mainstream-ish character fronting his own narrative game. Well, two of them he was kidnapped in, but that's not the point. DK's on the cover, so he wins by default. With another conclusion of a trilogy comes yet another example to toss at the perpetual question of whether or not the third is the worst out of all of them, and maybe this is Nintendo being Nintendo, but this question I've always found to be completely ridiculous and able to be toppled by the merest of scrutinies. Nintendo actually puts out pretty solid trilogies. Mario Party, Super Mario Bros., the Donkey Kong Country series that we just did, Metroid Prime, Zelda, maybe? I'm not actually sure how Spirit Tracks came about. But let's just say that with every point brought up in favor, there seems to be a readily available counter-argument just standing on the sidelines, and today we're going to be talking about one. Dixie Kong's Double Trouble. While the other two titles of this series have had largely average Nintendo-flavored plots going through them, i.e. one cutscene at the beginning and one at the end, 2 sentences of plot, and fill in the rest with solid platforming action, Double Trouble doesn't even meet that low bar. From what I could remember, I think the game actually started with Dixie and Kitty talking to Cranky or Funky about something, and then everyone just realized suddenly that DK and Diddy were missing, and they didn't know what to do, so Dixie just took charge of it. Either that or I was somehow watching the GBA remake that I didn't play. So either that happened, or literally nothing happened and Dixie just starts going on a journey for no reason. Well, here we are, girls taking charge, so where are we going? Well, one of the first places we get taken to is a whole different world map that Rareware had put together for Dixie's Shindig. Instead of the game world just getting laid in front of the player and the entire trip is already planned from the get-go, the player instead has to take Dixie around the world map and figure out where the critical path actually is. And personally, I like this change because it actually feels clever to figure out where the next island is, and finally giving the player some sort of exploratory award for figuring out who to talk to and where to put the items that they find along the way in order to progress the actual gameplay. The first several levels are pretty much put out in front of you, but once you get to the end of the first island, the game kind of stops for a bit, since at that point, a veteran player would probably ask themselves, where the hell is the rest of the game? And then from there, they either fuck around for a while until they just stumble upon the next bit by accident, or look up the walkthrough to get that just out of the way. After whatever path they take, Dixie will inevitably visit Funky Kong, who has an actual in-story role this time in which he's introduced to his more mechanical skill set and builds traveling machines for Dixie if she gets him the parts. Classic friend who can build shit relationship. And once you get your first boat, kind of like Final Fantasy VII, Dixie is finally free to explore more of the world map on her own terms. She gets to find the levels and the bosses and continue living life like a swashbuckling female pirate monkey who has a giant baby. Well, since we managed to get to the next island, let's talk about the reason we're actually here. Levels to crush. I don't know if I made this clear or not in the DKC or DKC2 videos since I have a terrible memory, I guess, but one of the major complaints I had for both, especially Diddy Kong's Quest, was that Rareware were clearly studiers of the Nintendo hard school of thought back in the day, and progressively made the games more impossible to complete towards the end with really horrible multi-phase final bosses, and finally, the criticism has been taken. Double Trouble was way more enjoyable of a game since Rareware finally put on the damned brakes. I think the final world was still kind of a pain, but considering that I'm comparing this to the squeaky sprint or whatever it was at the end of DKC2, where I literally had to do a pixel-perfect jump using a ridiculous double jump mechanic, let's just say that anything else would have gotten a pass. Like the last two games, Rareware is always improving and coming up with new ideas for gimmicks, new mechanics, new types of levels, so in Double Trouble, there really isn't anything that's actually repeated directly from the first two games except for generic themes of levels, which is fair since you can do a lot of different things using just the forest as a starting point. The first couple levels featured a logging town and wooden structures with traps were a pretty prominent feature for a bunch of levels, which was new and fun since it added more of a puzzle emphasis, making a slower, more unique experience that isn't just straight garbage. I'm not going to go over everything that's changed since that would be kind of a waste of time, and the corresponding footage you're seeing can give you a kind of a hint as to what has actually changed. Movement's been refined, and I don't think I had any issues with it at all when I was playing, so that's probably been improved to a good extent. It's got better platforming. The boss fights in the game are more creative and feel more like set pieces, whereas the original game just had a giant gopher twice on the critical path. As a staple of Rareware, they have improved level design, the art direction to include some of the more technological additions to the SNES. I'm pretty sure there's more Mode 7 in there somewhere being used to make dazzling backgrounds. The soundtrack is still kick-ass and perfectly sums up the action and the levels that they're in. So yeah, it's definitely a solid game all around. Good everything. Well, except for that one thing. While Dixie Kong making the protagonist role was a great decision, since the one thing that made Dixie unique back in DKC 2 was that she could glide for a comparatively long distance. And since past games had pretty pants jumping, which made things like the classic of repeating enemy jumps pretty hard to manage and also slightly dangerous, Dixie putting that glide ability in the player's hand from the get-go was just a brilliant idea. It gives better control, slower jumping, and just more precision all around. Overall, it's just way more useful to get through the platforming. It's a perfect idea. But then there's the other guy, Kitty. Oh, Kitty. The guy that Funky just had to finagle onto the team with Dixie Kong just because he was there at the time and could do things like crack a boat in half or something with just his hand. His thing is that he has freakish strength, so he's at least a quote-unquote useful character. But Jesus, I don't know what the fans think of Kitty, but I cannot stand him. Like, Rareware made him to be a literal baby, and a literal baby be what he is, and that's not a good thing. I was reading up on his abilities because I never used him in the game other than the bits the game requires you to use him in, and with those barriers that he has the only ability to get around because, well, what would be the point of using Kitty as a protagonist? He's slower, has worse jumping, and can't glide. He can pretty much run through all the enemies of the game, but other than that, there is no point to Kitty Kong, and his personality is terrible. One of the main animations that he has in the game is going into a full arm thrashing explosive tantrum. It's not charming, it's just really freakishly annoying. Like, DKC 3 is on the level of a cartoon, and in a cartoon, you have the free license to play up a character for a baby, but instead Rareware thought literal, realistic baby was the correct path, which it really isn't, because you've only condensed down all the annoying bullshit of a baby into a character, rather than any of the adorableness. Plus, you've given the player no practical reason to use him in the game, since he's just a slow character in a platformer. He apparently has the ability to do sick jump combos and can hop across water and shit that an advanced player could take more advantage of, but all of that becomes a pretty irrelevant point, since it could go all south pretty fast if you miss a couple button presses. Dixie's just more reliable overall, has better control, and isn't annoyingly designed, so she just wins by default. The less annoying characters didn't get under my skin, but there were also problems with the Bear Clan characters that you find regularly on each world map. I wasn't directly annoyed with them, I was annoyed with the mechanic that they were revolved around. And now that I'm thinking about it, this was the exact same feeling I had playing Zelda 2 for the first time. Spoiler warning, I literally played Zelda 2 for around 5 to 7 minutes before giving up and moving on to Ocarina of Time. Yes, I'm totally serious there, and you want to know why I'm annoyed at both games? They don't explain shit. In Zelda 2, I got to the first town thing on the map. I figured out how to enter it, and then how to enter people's houses. I was asked to get an item for this one guy. I left the town and went to a locked gate, couldn't figure out what the hell, and then just gave up. Because I had nowhere else to go, and I didn't want to just continually cycle through the stuff I didn't understand what was going on. In DKC 3, I listened to the bears explain their shticks about how they wanted things, just in classic adventure game style, and then I never found the thing they wanted or knew where the hell to find them in the first place, and so I just ended up not caring at all. 100% neglect on everybody's problem. I feel really disappointed about that too, because Rareware clearly put a lot of effort into all of these Bear Clan characters and coming up with pun names for all of them, giving them accented dialogue and threading the entire item-based questline around all, like, 10 of them or something. And I couldn't personally figure out what any of it meant or why it was there in the first place. My first theory about why this existed turned out to be absolutely correct. It was a convoluted excuse to add in the usual mega bonus level of challenging hardship, which at least made me glad that I didn't miss anything important, since I'm not one of those people that ever seeks out the extra post bits of the game unless it's very clear cut and available right from the start of the end of the game. I've made it a rule here that if I have to put in substantial post-game work to get at that content, then it's going on the shelf and it can feel bad for asking for that effort. I have other things to do. I felt that it wouldn't be fair to leave it out of this video, since Rareware clearly put a lot of work into it. It's content that is available if you can figure it out. It is extra objectives and additional challenge, which fleshes out a game's value and makes it more satisfying to play, so that is there if you can put the building blocks together and find the gears or the boat parts or whatever random crap is lying around that all of the Bear Clan people apparently can't find themselves through all these connections that they have. Another thing that I thought was weird was that the K rule at the end of this game doesn't feel like the same K rule as the other two games ended with. I guess that might be because he gave himself a ridiculous new name, Baron K. Rulenstein, and he grew a lot smarter since his battle from the last game, and is now more scientifically inclined as a villain. He requires a lot of gadgets to fight with and all that stuff, and his overall plan is actually less stupid than you would think. So you remember at the start of this video how DK and Diddy went missing and no one knew where they went, so Dixie went on this whole journey to end up finding them? It turns out that by the end, you find DK and Diddy in an absurd flying combat mech robot barrel thing, and then they turned evil and powered it to kill Dixie and Kitty because of cartoon logic. The fights with Chaos are pretty crazy and require some precise attacks to beat the thing down. It takes a little bit of a while and it might be the final boss as well, so making it formidable was always going to be the plan. I just wanted to point out how over the top the entire boss fight they went with was, since it's kind of important being DK's prison and all. I think that's kind of it. That's DKC 3 in a nutshell. The more refined, more technologically impressive, and less impossible to play entry in the Donkey Kong Country series, and was the favorite of mine in the original trilogy. Just to prelude the future, unfortunately future reviews are going to look more like this in the DK franchise because unlike the Mario and Yoshi series, DK received a lot of games, and a lot of those games are very similar to each other. They are going to be shorter because there's just not a lot to say about these games, and one sub spin-off in particular might actually kill me for once. I don't know what I'm going to do about it now, but I will make a plan for it. But for now, I just wanted to tell you that I'm going to try, but I don't think I'm going to get that far. At least we get to leave Rareware's days on the SNES workhorse behind us with a big thumbs up that Double Trouble was a fun time to be had by all, that had the bells and whistles expected on a sequel, that was made by people who gave a crap to make a functioning, designed to be fun video game using everything they've learned from 3 years of work. Good job, here's your special scoreboard. And I hope you all have the best time with a final victory for gamers. See ya.